This was the fourth time my phone buzzed during dinner. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Unknown number. Again. I let it ring out. My husband Robert looked up from his plate, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through his own phone. "Aren't you going to answer that?" "If it's important, they'll leave a message," I said, keeping my voice light. He grunted and went back to his screen, and I went back to pushing food around my plate. The roasted chicken I'd spent 2 hours preparing suddenly tasted like cardboard. The thing about being married for 38 years is that you develop an instinct. You know when something is off, even before you have proof. And for the past 3 months, everything had been off. It started small. Robert staying late at the office even though he'd officially retired from his medical practice 6 months ago. New cologne, a sudden interest in the gym, and then the phone calls. Always from blocked or unknown numbers. Always when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I'm 62 years old. I've raised 3 children, supported my husband through medical school and residency, run our household, and managed to keep a smile on my face through every challenge life threw at us. I'm not stupid. And I'm certainly not blind. After dinner, while Robert was in the shower, I did what any woman in my position would do. I looked at our bank statements. My hands shook as I logged into our account. We'd always had joint finances, always. That's what you did when you built a life together, right? You shared everything. Except now, apparently, we didn't. 3 large transfers, $20,000 each, all to an account I didn't recognize. All within the last 2 months. I sat there in my home office, the same office where I used to help our kids with homework, where I'd balanced our household budget for decades, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. The next morning, I called my oldest friend, Margaret. She'd been a divorce attorney for 30 years before she retired. If anyone could help me, it was her. "Dorothy," she said when she answered, her voice warm. "What's wrong? You sound terrible." I told her everything. The phone calls, the late nights, the money transfers. When I finished, there was a long silence. "How much proof do you need before you act?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe there's an explanation." "There's always an explanation, sweetheart. The question is whether you want to hear it or whether you want to protect yourself first." That afternoon, while Robert was supposedly playing golf, I went to meet Margaret for coffee. She brought a colleague with her, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa, who specialized in asset protection. "The house," Lisa said immediately. "That's your childhood home, right? The one you inherited from your grandfather?" I nodded. "We've lived here for 35 years. Robert moved in after we got married." "Is his name on the deed?" "No. My grandfather put it in a trust. I'm the sole beneficiary. Robert always said that was fine, that it was my family home." My voice cracked. He said he loved that I had that security. Margaret and Lisa exchanged a look. "What?" I asked. "Nothing's final until you know for sure what's going on," Margaret said carefully. "But Dorothy, you need to be smart about this. If Robert is planning something, you need to be 3 steps ahead." They laid out a plan. "Document everything. Open a separate account. Start moving my personal funds, my inheritance, the money my grandfather had left me separately to safety. Quietly inventory the house. Get copies of all financial records. But don't confront him yet," Lisa warned. "Not until you know exactly what you're dealing with and you've protected yourself." I drove home that day feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I'd never been deceptive. I'd always believed in honesty, communication, working through problems together. But that night, when Robert kissed me goodnight and told me he loved me, I knew. I knew he was lying. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a woman I didn't recognize. I quietly transferred money. I photographed every valuable item in our house, my grandmother's jewelry, the antique furniture, the art collection we'd built over the years. I made digital copies of all our financial records, and I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank, and he was a friend of Margaret's late husband. Retired police detective, discreet, thorough. It took him less than a week. "Mrs. Morrison," he said when we met at a coffee shop across town, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "I'm sorry." Inside were photographs. Robert and a woman I recognized immediately, Jennifer Bradley, who'd been a nurse at his practice. She was 45, attractive, and in every photo, she was looking at my husband the way I used to look at him 38 years ago. There were pictures of them at restaurants, at a hotel in Portland, getting into a car together, and worst of all, pictures of them looking at houses. Houses. "They've been seeing each other for 8 months, Frank said quietly. "The money transfers? Down payments. He's setting up a new life." I sat there, looking at the evidence of my husband's betrayal, and something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plan. A calculated plan to leave me. And from what Frank had discovered, Robert thought he was being clever about it. He'd been consulting with a lawyer, planning to file for divorce. And he'd been trying to figure out how to get me to sign away my rights to the house, my house, by claiming we needed to downsize, that we should sell and split the proceeds. I drove home that day and looked at my house with new eyes. This beautiful Victorian home that had been in my family for 3 generations. Where I'd learned to walk, where I'd brought my own children home from the hospital, where I'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday parties and made a lifetime of memories. He'd been planning to take half of it. The house that was mine by inheritance, by blood, by every right. Not anymore. I called Lisa the next day. "I need you to review the trust documents. I need to make absolutely sure he has no claim to the house." "Already done," she said. "I pulled the records yesterday. Dorothy, the house is ironclad. Your grandfather was very thorough. The trust specifies that only direct descendants can benefit, and only you have control. Robert has been living there by your permission, but he has 0 legal claim. And the other assets? The retirement accounts are joint, so those would be split. But your personal inheritance, the investments you made with your grandfather's money, those are separate property. As long as you document that the funds never commingled, they're yours." We spent hours going through everything, every account, every asset, every investment. And slowly, I realized something. I was going to be fine, better than fine. My grandfather had been a successful businessman, and he'd left me well provided for. Over the years, I'd been smart with that money, investing it carefully, keeping it separate. I'd let Robert manage our joint accounts, our household finances. But my inheritance? That I'd manage myself. I had more than enough to live comfortably, to thrive, even. But Robert didn't know that. He'd always dismissed my inheritance as nice but modest. He had no idea how much it had grown over the years. 2 weeks later, on our 38th wedding anniversary, Robert said he wanted to take me to dinner at our favorite restaurant. I wore my best dress, did my hair and makeup carefully. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than I felt, tired, but there was something else in her eyes now, something hard, something determined. At dinner, Robert ordered wine, expensive wine. He made a toast to 38 years together, and then he told me he wanted a divorce. "Dorothy," he said, reaching across the table for my hand. I let him take it, even though my skin crawled at his touch. "We've had a good run, but I think we both know we've grown apart. It's time to move on. Start fresh." "Start fresh," I repeated numbly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. We can do this amicably. Sell the house, split the proceeds, divide the retirement accounts. You'll be well taken care of, I promise." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd loved for nearly 4 decades. This man I'd sacrificed everything for. Who'd built his career while I'd put mine on hold. Who'd become successful while I'd raised our children and managed our home and supported him through every challenge. And now he wanted to start fresh. "What about the kids?" I asked quietly. He shifted uncomfortably. "They're adults. They'll understand." "Will they understand about Jennifer?" I watched his face go white, watched him try to compose himself, to deny, to deflect. "Don't," I said, pulling my hand away. "I know everything, Robert. I've known for 3 weeks. The affair, the house hunting, the money you've been transferring, all of it. Dorothy, I spoke to a lawyer too," I continued, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "Actually, I spoke to several, and here's what they told me. The house? It's mine. Completely. Your name isn't on it. You have no legal claim, and you never will. It's in a trust that only I control." His mouth opened and closed. "The retirement accounts? Yes. Those will be split. That's fair. We both contributed to those. But my personal inheritance, the investments I made with my grandfather's money, those are separate property. You have no claim to those either. You can't. I can. And I have. I've already moved everything that's legally mine into separate accounts. I've documented every asset. I've changed the locks on the house. And tomorrow morning, my lawyer will be filing divorce papers on my terms. Robert's face turned red. You vindictive. Careful, I said quietly. We're in public, and I have a very good lawyer who would love for you to make threats. I stood up, leaving my napkin on the table. You wanted to start fresh, Robert, so let's start fresh. You can move in with Jennifer. I'll keep my family home. And we'll let the lawyers sort out the rest. The kids will never forgive you for this, he hissed. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I told them 2 days ago. I showed them everything. The affair, the financial planning, your attempt to take the house. They're quite upset, actually. But not with me. I left him sitting there, alone at our anniversary dinner, and walked out into the cool evening air. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up in my house, and made coffee in my kitchen. I sat in my breakfast nook, looking out at the garden I'd maintained for 35 years, and I called my daughter. Mom, Emily said, her voice thick with tears. Are you okay? I am, I said, surprised to find it was true. I really am. I can't believe Dad would do this. To you, to us, to our family. People change, honey. Or maybe they reveal who they always were, and we just didn't want to see it. What are you going to do? I looked around my beautiful home, at the life I'd built here. I'm going to live, sweetheart. Really live. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to do things for myself. Over the next 6 months, I rediscovered who I was. Not Robert's wife, not just someone's mother, but Dorothy, me. I'd been a talented artist before I got married. I'd given it up to support Robert's career, to raise our children. Now, I set up a studio in one of the spare bedrooms. I took classes at the local community college. I joined an art group. I traveled. First to visit friends I hadn't seen in years. Then further to Paris, to Italy, to all the places I'd always wanted to go but Robert had always been too busy for. I made new friends. Women my age who were also starting over, who understood what it meant to rebuild yourself after decades of putting yourself second. And I watched as Robert's perfect new life fell apart. Jennifer, it turned out, had been more interested in the successful doctor with money than the retired man going through a messy divorce. When she realized that Robert wasn't going to get the house, wasn't going to walk away with as much money as he'd promised, she left him. He had to rent a small apartment. His retirement account, split in the divorce, wasn't as substantial as he'd thought. He'd lived well, spent freely, assuming there would always be more. Our children, all 3 of them, were cordial but distant with him. They'd meet him for dinner occasionally, but the relationship had changed. Trust, once broken, is hard to repair. Meanwhile, I thrived. 1 year after our divorce was finalized, I had my first art show. Nothing huge, just a small gallery in town, but it was mine. My work, my vision, my second chance. Robert showed up. I saw him standing in the corner, looking at my paintings. He looked older, smaller somehow. The confidence that had always surrounded him had dimmed. When he approached me, I could see the regret in his eyes. Dorothy, he said quietly, these are beautiful. I never knew you were this talented. You never asked, I said simply. I made a mistake. You made many mistakes. I lost everything. Jennifer, the kids' respect, you, our life together. I looked at him, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not vindication, just sadness. Sadness for what could have been if he'd been a different man. If we'd been different people, you didn't lose everything, Robert. You chose to gamble it away for something you thought was better. That's not loss, that's consequence. Is there any chance? No, I said firmly. That chapter is closed. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even hurt. I'm just done. He nodded slowly and walked away. That night, I stood in my house, my beautiful house that had been in my family for generations, and I felt at peace. My daughter Emily and her family were coming for dinner tomorrow. My son James was flying in next month. My youngest, Sarah, called me every Sunday just to talk. I had my art. I had my friends. I had my home. I had my dignity. I had myself. And that, I realized, was everything. The phone rang, my personal phone, the new number that only people I cared about had. It was Margaret. "How was the show?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, smiling. "Absolutely perfect. Proud of you, Dorothy. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful." "I learned from the best," I said. "You taught me to be smart, to protect myself, to plan ahead. You did the hard part. You had the courage to act." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair, looking out at the garden lit by the setting sun. Tomorrow, I'd start a new painting. Next month, I'd take that trip to Greece I'd always wanted. And every day, I'd wake up in my house, surrounded by my history, my family's legacy, and my own hard-won peace. Robert had wanted to start fresh. And in a way, he'd given me that, just not in the way he'd intended. I started fresh by letting go of a man who didn't value me, by choosing myself, by refusing to be a victim. At 62, I'd learned the most important lesson of my life. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to stand up for what's yours. And it's never too late to start over. My grandfather used to say that the house he built wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a foundation, a legacy, a promise that his descendants would always have a place to stand. He'd been right. And now, standing on that foundation, I was building something new. Not for a husband who didn't appreciate me, not for a life that wasn't authentic. For me, and it was going to be beautiful.